As I am sure we all know at this point, Conservatives had a very, very bad night in Canada on Tuesday. Very, very bad night for them. They lost at an election that just a few months ago they were expected to win. Pierre Poilievre was expected to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. At points, he had close to a 95% chance. Look at this. We're so close to a 93% chance of being the next Prime Minister of Canada, and he is not. Not only is he not the next Prime Minister of Canada, he lost his seat in Parliament. He does not have a seat in Parliament anymore. He was defeated by a long-shot candidate. Just terrible for the Conservatives, a terrible showing for them, which was clearly a referendum on Donald Trump in the United States, which is a complete joke. Canada has a lot of issues, and they think their biggest issue is Donald Trump. What a joke. What a joke. That's why Canada's a joke in North America. A complete joke. And no wonder Alberta wants to leave. Can anybody want to blame Alberta or Saskatchewan for wanting to leave? I don't blame them at all. Alberta, they basically fund all of Canada through equalization payments. They're a net contributor to the federal government. But yet, the rest of Canada takes their money, they spit in their face, they poo-poo on them. Why would Alberta want to stay? Why would they want to stay? And we already have some pretty big data and some pretty big news that the Premier, Danielle Smith from Alberta, has rolled out a new bill. It is called Bill 54, the Election Statutes Amendment Act, which aims to enhance the integrity and accessibility of elections while emphasizing referendums several times in the announcement. This is a huge pushback against the new Liberal government that will be led by Prime Minister Mark Carney. It will be led by him. This legislation, which they say it is going to, or it seeks to protect democratic processes, ensure fair and transparent elections, and boost public confidence in voting outcomes, as well as laying out a number of different demands, for the federal government, and making it much easier for the people of Alberta to call a referendum. That's the big thing that we're seeing in this legislation here. Right now, in order to have a referendum, a petition must collect approximately 600,000 signatures from eligible voters, which is about 20% of Alberta's eligible voters based on the most recent general election turnout within a 90-day period. If this law is passed, Bill 54, not only will it cut that number in half from 600,000 to 300,000, it will also extend the waiting or the period in which you have time to collect those signatures to 120 days. 120 days, 300,000 eligible voters, which would actually, it really means it's 10% of eligible voters based on the most recent general election. And we know, just before the federal elections, Premier Danielle Smith issued a series of demands for whoever the next prime minister is, because the reality is yes, Liberals have been in control in Canada for years, but they have been neglected by Conservatives and Liberals. If you look at a Conservative in America versus a Conservative in Canada, you would think the Conservative from Canada is a Liberal. They are. They pander to these cultural minorities. They're a complete joke of a party. They're kind of like, if you're from Minnesota, you'll get this. They're kind of like the Minnesota GOP, a complete and pathetic joke. That's what they are. And I say that as someone from Minnesota who has voted for the GOP, will most likely vote for GOP-endorsed candidates here in 2025. I know we have school board elections where I'm from that are coming up. We have mayoral races. We have city council races. And I'll most likely be voting for the more conservative candidate, or the person who I believe is a more conservative candidate. But that is like the Conservative Party in Canada. They're a complete joke. But in Alberta, it's a little different. Danielle Smith has released her demands. She wants to establish oil and gas corridors in the northeast and west portions of Canada. They want to repeal legislation that really stops pipeline development. They want to lift the tanker ban off the coast of British Columbia. They want to scrap the proposed emissions cap on the oil and gas industry, eliminate clean energy regulations, end the federal prohibition on single-use plastics, and scrap the net zero car mandate and allow provinces to oversee the industrial carbon tax and end in, quote, federal censorship of energy companies. Because here's the reality. The reality is that Alberta is Canada's largest oil producer. They are. They are the largest oil producer in Canada. They produce roughly about 80% of the oil and gas that's produced in Canada. I think it's 80% of the crude oil and like 70% of the natural gas. So cut it in half, call it 75%, which fuels the domestic energy needs and exports, primarily which go to the U.S., which generate roughly $120, $130 billion in oil and gas revenue per year with trade from the United States. And Alberta's oil sands are a cornerstone not only of Alberta and the Alberta's economy and their ability to provide cash for the rest of Canada to subsidize the rest of Canada. Not only is it for that, but it's for Canada overall. Because you have 97, 98% of Canada's oil reserves are located in Alberta. They're roughly 175 billion barrels of oil. Alberta contributes roughly 17, 18, 19% of Canada's GDP, over roughly about $350 billion in 2024, despite having only like 10 or 11% of the population. And at a per capita, the per capita GDP is among the highest in Canada, driven by energy, agriculture, and petrochemicals. They have roughly a $70,000 per capita GDP in Alberta. That is huge. And they have this thing called, they have this beautiful oil there. Beautiful oil that is totally trashed on by the rest of Canada. They allow Alberta to sell their oil, even though they regulate the hell out of it. They make money from it. They give the money to Canada, to the rest of Canada, and then the rest of Canada spits in their face and poo-poos on them. It's a complete joke. It is a complete joke. And Alberta's strong economy, like we said, means they're a net contributor to Canada's equalization program, which redistributes wealth to less prosperous economies or other provinces. We know from about 2006, 2007 to 2024, Alberta contributed roughly $250 billion to the federal government. $250 billion. That's more than $14 billion per year. $14 billion per year. They subsidize services in other provinces like Quebec and the Maritimes. They contribute roughly about $13,000 or $14,000 per person in Alberta to the national coffers. It's a joke. And you know what? And like we said, what does Canada do? They spit in their face. They regulate the hell out of them. They do everything they can to make life harder for the people of Alberta. But they can't deny it. Alberta is a powerhouse in Canada. Canada would not be a country without Alberta. They would collapse. Where are they going to get their oil from? Where are they going to get their energy from? You're going to have 15 to 20%, probably even 25, even upwards of 30% of your gross domestic product disappear overnight. Overnight it will disappear. And you talk about it, all of the infrastructure that's in Alberta, the energy infrastructure, pipelines, railways, it is a logistical hub for sending product into the United States. Not a lot goes inter-Canada. Most of it comes to the United States. And its proximity with the United States is what makes it such a valuable partner. And rail networks that support upwards of $200 billion in commerce over the rails. And Alberta, they rely on oil and gas, which is beautiful. They rely on this beautiful oil and gas, and they have roughly $160 billion, 160 billion barrels of oil in Alberta that has been untapped. Because this is what Alberta does. They pay more and they get less, which fuels the resentment there. With 65% of residents believing the system is unfair. Look at this right here. Percent of people who agree their province is treated fairly by the national government. Look at this. In Alberta, 36% of people believe they're treated fairly. And actually, the funny part is this is the highest that number has been in almost a decade. 9 years. It is almost a decade high. For this decade, it's the highest, but in the previous trailing 10 years, it is a high. And that's a complete joke. So you're telling me 65% of people from Canada believe that the system treats them unfairly. And Canada, despite this, Canada may have some economic stability and energy security, but that all hinges on Alberta, their resources and their fiscal strength, their fiscal position. If they did not have Alberta, they'd be screwed. Honest to God, what are they going to do? Look at this right here. Now, this was back in 2015, I think, but at that time, Alberta paid $6,000 more into the national budget per person than they got back. Alberta was the only province that was a net contributor to the budget, which they expected by 2020 to be over $40,000 per taxpayer. And you know what they do? They just sit back and let it happen. But I think it's no more. The people of Alberta are fed up. They're fed up with this BS. They've had enough of it. They've had enough of being spit in the face by the rest of Canada. And yeah, we're looking at you, Ontario and Quebec. We are. And all you freaking libtards, because that's what you guys are. You're a bunch of libtards. You know, in the United States should do everything they can to bring Alberta. I don't care. Give Alberta $10 billion. I don't care. Let's buy Alberta from Canada. I don't even care if we go through a legal process or the democratic process in Canada. Screw them. They've been screwing Alberta for decades. Why should we now start to follow the rules now? I'm kind of being half-heartedly, but like saying that, but obviously it has to go through the Clarity Act. It's very clear there has to be a referendum. They have to get a clear majority. It has to go to the House of Commons. They have to split up assets, liabilities. There's a lot of logistical things that have to happen, but I think we are as close as we have been in probably the last decade, if not the last 5 or 6 years, than we have been to a separation. Because like we said, Alberta is Canada's largest oil producer. They have one of the world's largest crude oil reserves of approximately 160 billion barrels that could be recoverable. It supplies about 4.3 million barrels of oil and gas daily to the United States, which accounts for 60% of U.S. crude oil imports. American refineries are optimized for Alberta's heavy oil, and it trades at roughly a 15 to 20% discount compared to U.S. crude oil, which saves U.S. fuel makers billions of dollars annually. And we have integrated infrastructure with Alberta. We have steady, reliable oil and gas that comes from Alberta, reducing the U.S. dependency on global markets like OPEC. You know, Donald Trump wants to have energy independence, energy dominance, drill baby drill, which will lower prices across the board. This is how you do it. The U.S. consumes about 20 million barrels of oil and gas per day. We produce about 13 or 14. Okay, you want to make up that 6 million barrel a day gap? Okay, 4 million right now from Alberta, and I guarantee you we're not running at full capacity. Wait until, mark my words on this, wait until we start drilling off the coast of California. You know, you go out a couple 100 miles and we start drilling oil out there. Oh my gosh. It's going to be beautiful. But like we said, Alberta's pipelines primarily run south to the United States through things like the Keystone XL pipeline. You know, this would be huge. Not only would it be great for America, it would be great for Alberta. Alberta would reap the benefits like there was no tomorrow. They would be in such a beautiful position. Beautiful position. Whether they're a state, whether they're, a territory, Alberta would gain a tariff-free access to the U.S. market. They'd benefit from its oil, gas, and agriculture and manufacturing sector, which would boost not only U.S. GDP by incorporating Alberta's roughly $350 billion economy, but it would allow companies, it would bring more investment into Alberta. And if Alberta adopted the U.S. dollar, it would stabilize the economy there compared to the Canadian dollar, which has been rapidly sinking. It's a complete joke. This would could attract a ton of investment and reduce currency exchange risks for U.S. businesses and create tons of jobs in the refining, agriculture, tech fields. And then you want to talk about rare earth minerals. Alberta has tons of rare earth minerals like uranium and farmland that could enhance the U.S. self-sufficiency in critical minerals and technology, energy, food security. Alberta, we have a lot of things that we're dependent on China for in the United States. Things like auto manufacturing, ingredients that go into our pharmaceuticals, rare earth minerals. There's a lot that we're reliant, microprocessing chips, supercomputers. We're reliant on China. This could help us. This could help move us closer to being reliant on China. And we know that Alberta's political culture leans more to the right, so they would probably most likely vote with the Republican Party in advance Republican priorities, which, if they became a state, would be huge. 2 new senators, more representatives, probably get a handful. But And this is why I'd be okay taking on Alberta, maybe Saskatchewan. I don't want all of Canada. Are you kidding me? Screw them. Screw them. I'd be okay taking like Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia, Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Especially, and I only say that because the Arctic Circle, that's huge. National security, geopolitical risks, risk mitigation, international security. It would be huge. And the thing is if Canada wants to be their own independent country, how about they defend themselves? Why do they spend about half of what they should be spending on defense? Why does the U.S. have to pick up for the slack? This is what I say. I say the U.S. should have a policy. If a country has been insufficient on the amount of money they should be paying for defense every year, and then the U.S. has to come to the defense, we should be able to take that country over. They are officially a part of the United States of America now, as a territory. I 100% agree. 100%. You're insufficient. You know, look at this. If you, and now I can't legally give out advice on this because I'm not an insurance agent, but if you get into a car accident and you are late on your auto policy, you didn't pay your car insurance, your policy canceled, the insurance company's not going to pay it out for you. They're not. You were late. You take care of it yourself. This is what I say. We're going to take care of you because you're people, but we're going to take you over after that. You are a part of the United States of America at that point. It would be so vital for national security, international security. It's the same thing with Greenland. Same issues you run into there. But that's going to wrap things up for today, folks. This is the recap of Danielle Smith giving really a huge moves on how Alberta can leave Canada. The huge path they have to leave Canada. So that's going to wrap things up for today, folks. We'll catch you next time.